Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, James Ashley, and today I will be connecting you with Luciano Cedrone. Luciano is a security professional with a unique blend of law enforcement, corporate, and commercial real estate experience. His areas of expertise are enterprise risk management, intelligence, security planning, governance, and compliance. Luciano spent a decade with York Regional Police Service, specializing in major organized crime investigations. In 2009, he transitioned into commercial real estate as Director of Security and Life Safety at Cadillac Fairview. He then stepped up to be Vice President of Security at Brookfield Properties. Luciano has helped manage the financial district security response through numerous protests and events, including G20 and the Pan Am Games. He is a certified protection professional. He holds an honors degree in political science. He's also a founding member and past chair of PATHcomm, an emergency communication platform connecting over 30 buildings in downtown Toronto. A respected leader and a passionate security professional, it is my pleasure to introduce Luciano Cedrone. Luciano, very good morning to you. Welcome. Great to have you here. I see you've got the espresso in hand and we're ready to dive into this conversation today.
Good morning and thank you for having me. I'm excited at being your guest today.
So to set the scene, Luciano, let's start by talking about your career journey. Let's talk about how you've navigated that path and the lessons that you have taken along the way. So the first question I have for you, let's rewind the clock 11 years back to 2009. You're with Cadillac Fairview as Director of Security and Life Safety. It's your first job in real estate. What were some of the valuable lessons that you learned during your time at Cadillac?
Well, my first job in commercial real estate certainly was exciting. Heading up the major property in downtown Toronto. I'm looking forward to sort of working for a premier company with a reputation for good security. When I got there, I was a little surprised at the lack of sort of structure that they had coming from policing, where everything we did was sort of spelt out for you and there was a procedure for everything. In the private sector, that just was less of a reality. And so a lot of my time was spent developing those policies and procedures and making sure that they had some structure that created some accountability for the program as opposed to just sort of operating as they wanted.
So what were some of the areas that you focused on in enhancing and improving during those early days?
So one example would be use of force in security. Certainly in commercial real estate, we're almost constantly putting hands on people in a figurative sense for trespassing. That's a big problem for us. Certainly homeless people and unwanted activity, things like that. The problem or the issue was that with that, when you put your hands on somebody, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And when we had an excessive amount of arrests that I thought were happening at some of our properties, and my other two directors sort of agreed with me that we had an issue with this concern because it unnecessarily exposes the company to liability. If that person gets hurt, he trips on a curb while he's walking away because your guard is pushing him away, that come back onto the company in terms of bad publicity, costs, and all those types of things. So it's important for them to understand what those implications are, what the liability is with running that kind of a program, and then making sure that the guards understand it and are trained appropriately to manage it. There's always a time. I'm not the type of guy who says that, you will never put your hands on somebody, because there are people who sometimes have to be dealt with. Guys punching somebody out, you can't just sit there and call police and say that that's what you want your guard to do. They have to be able to intervene, and we were developing the guidance to make them do that safely and in good practice.
I imagine what else has changed during the course of your career is advancements in technology. And so looking back over the last 20 years, what have been some of the major changes that you've seen, and how have those changes impacted how security goes about its work today?
Technology has certainly progressed. Probably every 6 months there's something new coming onto the market that's exciting, new, offers new opportunities for security programs to be able to sort of take it to the next level. The challenges with the technology, I think, has always been the people part of it, understanding what that technology can do for the program and making sure that the technology supports your mission statement and your people on the ground, and not the other way around. Because a lot of times there's a presumption that, I'll get cameras that will monitor that area and that should be sufficient. But there's that legal expectation that once those cameras are up, not only are they operating properly, but you've got to have a response capacity. If you're watching somebody get mugged, then there needs to be somebody who can respond to that, whether it's the police or your guard service. But there has to be processes driving the technology. Otherwise, it's just technology that goes to waste. Analytics is another great field where things have developed to such a level where they can basically monitor anything that you want on those cameras, or they can track you on the phones. But at the end of the day, what is your end game? Do you need that technology? Because if you don't need it, you're just wasting money. You're just throwing it out the window. It'll never be used. And there's lots of CCTV systems that operate that way. They've got all these bells and whistles. Nobody's using them. So it defeats the purpose. Technology is great, but let's use it, understand it, so we can benefit the program at the end of the day.
There is always room for improvement in any industry and within any team. So I wonder, can you share with us one of the gaps that you see in security and commercial real estate? And for anybody that's looking to step up or step into the industry, what would be your words of wisdom or advice or encouragement for them to perhaps address this gap, spearhead this issue, and make a positive impact and change for the future?
Probably one of the biggest sort of challenges in the industry that I've seen and I continue to work towards. The industry is really changing. Certainly in recent years, legislative drivers have changed the dynamics in security, specifically where property owners may be taking on more responsibility than they're really aware of. The days are gone where you put a guy in a uniform, put him in the front of your door and say that that's security. There's really a whole other aspect that comes to it when you speak to duty of care obligations under health and safety, when you speak to liability, exposure, not making sure that your team's properly trained and accounted for, you've got the documentation going on. All these things help a property owner protect their business at the end of the day when things go bad. And I think that that's a real opportunity for people coming into the business today to really understand what are those exposures and how can we mitigate those risks. Now you're starting to change the conversation from just a security manager who's worried about cameras and guards to really a risk manager that accounts for security, and incorporating those into a business support model where security doesn't just get viewed as an expense. Oh, we got to pay for those cameras, we got to pay for those guards, but it starts to be viewed as a value add to the business, because now we're protecting the bottom line, avoiding lawsuits, protecting people while they're on our property, making sure that they can do business safely. And all these things help make the business better.
Let's move this towards education now, because you are somebody who's been committed to lifelong learning. You went to university, you got your schooling, and you've continued your education throughout your career. Why has education been so important in getting you to where you are today?
So I think this is probably one of the biggest experiences I can speak to, because coming from a policing background and the security industry, I find, there's the guys who come up through the security side of it, never carried a badge, never had any interest in being a police officer, but basically, take their lumps coming up as a security guard and management, and up the chain they go. And there's that type of security person, if you want to use that terminology. And then there's the other side of it, which is typically ex-law enforcement who come into the role largely, I would say, as a free pass. And that's speaking as a former officer myself. And I have lots of friends who do policing, obviously, still. But I think there's a misperception in the business, certainly amongst the companies that I've dealt with in the past, and listening to my peers. There's a perception that because you're a former police officer, that's an automatic sort of you must know security. And that just isn't the case. As a police officer, I knew law enforcement, and that was my role, responding to issues that were sort of largely driven by criminal complaints, criminal activity, provincial offenses and things like that. When you move into security, it's a much bigger field. You need much more understanding of what the risks are. And then you have to be able to transition the understanding of security risk as it relates to the property management, commercial real estate space. What are those risks and how do they impact the company? What should you be aware of as a property management company? And that's where I think a lot of people fail. On the officer side, police officers coming into the business, they tend to just walk in and expect to be given the role because of their 30 years experience. And some of them really do well at it. I think most don't. What I did when I knew that I was coming into the private sector, I actually started doing research. I reached out to ACES. I wrote my CPP within 6 months of leaving policing. So I prepared myself to legitimize myself and to give me some credibility when I applied to the private sector. So I think that is important, to have the initiative to go out and learn the business. Don't just assume that you know it. A lot of people assume they know securities because, what does he do? He just stands there. There's a guy in a uniform. What else can they be doing? Well, there's a heck of a lot going on out there if you choose to educate yourself on that.
That's a great answer. And I'd like to expand on this slightly more and ask you, what particular modules or what areas, subject matters, have you enrolled in and learnt about on the courses, on the programs? And particularly for our audience listening, what would you be encouraging of them to do?
So for me, coming in sort of at a more senior level into commercial real estate, because I started as a director, at that level, I think you really need to start looking at a more wholesome picture of security. Managers and below, I would recommend they focus more on understanding the security basics. And that's not to say one's better than the other. It's just where you are in your maturity level towards your career path. In the lower levels, you really need to understand the technology, understand patrols, invoicing, all the basic things that the security operation requires on a day-to-day basis. As you get up into the senior levels where I am, then you really need to start expanding your vision. It's not about the four corners you're protecting anymore. And this is a struggle I've had with the downtown security community for a long time. There's still a lot of security managers out there, senior guys, who still look at security risk within their own four corners. And in today's world, those risks don't exist anymore just within your four corners. You've got to be looking across the street. You've got to be looking at national and international things that are going on. Terrorism, those are all things that come back and could impact your operations. So I've looked at counterterrorism training, which I've done. I've given that to my guards. I've looked at CEBTED, which is an environmental design certification that speaks to how to design workspace to make it more conducive to security operations. It's a lot more sort of strategic in the training and courses that I look for now.
Luciano, building teams, nurturing those teams and growing those teams has been a huge part of your scope of work in the industry. What are some of the more important personal characteristics that you look for in individuals when you're interviewing, when you're going through the hiring process, when you're building your team? What does that look like?
First of all, I really enjoy hiring people and getting to know people, meeting new people. For me, it starts with the resume, looking at sort of the basics. Do they fulfill the knowledge requirements of the role? But more importantly, once you go beyond sort of the paperwork, it's understanding their ability to present themselves in a confident and competent manner. When they come into the room for the interview, are they sort of hesitant? Are they dressed appropriate? Things like that all telltale sort of signals as to who they are. Do they care about what the world thinks of them when they walk into your office? Confidence has to be there. Professionalism has to be there. But they also have to have character. To me, character and passion is the key to having a great team. The other thing I think is important to remember with hiring people is understanding their capacity to fit into the culture of where you're bringing them into.
I think that's a great response. And often now companies are very savvy and hiring managers in terms of hiring for fit and what that means. And you mentioned there about corporate culture and sounds to me as if that's something that's certainly been an important part of your hiring process. I'd like us to continue the conversation on hiring practices, and it's common knowledge that the security workforce is predominantly a male-dominated industry. What has been your contribution towards gender equality inside of the security profession?
Certainly lots of experience around the topic coming from policing, law enforcement, which has been historically sort of male-dominated, to your point. And it had its challenges sort of establishing equality in those units. And it was a challenge, for sure. My approach was always open. I like to say transparent in the sense that I believe anybody who can do the job should be able to do the job for the same pay and benefits and all the rest of that. And to be honest, there were we're going back a few years now, but there were times in policing where we had some female constables that people didn't want to ride with because fear of safety, ludicrous arguments at the end of the day. I took that initiative to partner with those females. and they can pull their weight, and it was impressive. The other equation to this, James, doesn't get talked about often, is the fact that the customers also respond to those females differently. And in policing, there were situations where our customers, the bad guys or the complainant, refused to actually speak to the female officer that attended with me. And so for me to sit there, I would just tell them, it's actually her area and it's her call. And so if you want this to be dealt with, you're going to deal with this female police officer because she's competent just like me. And so that's sort of how I started the journey down, this isn't right. I need to do something to support that direction. Certainly when they're qualified like anybody else and deserve that respect. So moving into the private sector, the challenge was a little more because, security doesn't have the same sort of progressive policies in place to drive females into the security profession. And there's all kinds of other reasons for that. That may play into the decisions. But I can tell you in my experience, since moving over to the private sector, when I'm hiring, candidates are few and far between. So we need to do a better job of promoting it as a career path, a valid career path. In terms of what I've done, I can tell you that I promoted the first female for one of my former employees into a security management role. I was the first female to get that role. And questions were being asked, all those stereotypical, is she too soft, too nice, all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, she actually did a better job in the role than I think certainly her predecessor did, because she took on a team that had low morale, little support, and was being sort of beaten by the public they were serving on a daily basis. She went in there as a new manager and turned that team around. They became very confident, very motivated. She matured. I encouraged her to join the Women in Security for ACES, which she did. And then she organized the Women in Security Conference. She was kind enough to invite me to speak at that conference, again, in support of the role and need for women in the business. Because at the end of the day, they bring different experiences, again, to the role. And that means we have different solutions to issues. It's not always about use of force. It's not always about, where the security guards are going to do it our way. And that's not to say that they can't do it, but they just bring a different perspective that allows for different solutions that could be a better result for everybody at the end of the day.
Let's go on to talking about one of your proudest moments that you've had in your career. And perhaps we can look at this in the last 10 years of your career in commercial real estate. Were there any particular moments or events that really stood out for you as a career highlight?
Well, for me, I think the PATHcomm program, more and more people are starting to learn about it. It was sort of off the radar for a while. But basically, PATHcomm is a privately funded, encrypted channel that links about 30 to 35 properties now in downtown Toronto, basically 52 division, directly with Toronto Police. So those buildings are able to communicate directly with each other in times of emergency. So we created that not in response to G20, but in preparation. We were already going to build that channel before G20 was announced. G20 was just the conduit for it to sort of come to fruition that much quicker. And, it was seamless in the way it worked, better than we could have ever expected. All the different security teams from all the different companies, it's not proprietary by any stretch. It was, you had to fulfill a certain standard to be part of the system. But all those teams were talking to each other during G20, coordinating security resources, making sure that emergency services got sort of clear paths underground to move resources around in response to issues that were going on the street and things like that. So, for example, the underground path in Toronto was never locked down in its history. We were able to do that in 2 minutes on the first night of G20 when we got information that, they were going to target the underground path. So we coordinated a complete shutdown in 2 minutes.
Luciano, we're all motivated by something, and I would like the listeners to learn a little bit more about what is that thing that motivates you. So let's delve into your passion here. And before we arrive at passion, there's a path that we have to take to discover what that is. So what are some of the steps that you've taken to discover yours?
I read a lot of books, like I guess a lot of people do, trying to find that magical sort of answer as to what motivates me. I have learned through the years that definition probably changes as you mature and life experiences change your perceptions on things. When I was younger, as a police officer, obviously you were there to help people. You wanted to catch bad guys and things like that. But transitioning into the private sector security, it's really more about understanding how security can better protect people and assets. And that's really what I think motivated me to get into commercial real estate. You've got hundreds of thousands of people going through that Toronto financial district every day. there's a lot of things going on in that place. Like, people have no idea. You just walk to your office every day and completely oblivious to the risks that are down there, but there's lots of risks. And being part of the solution and knowing that, our work is contributing to making those people get to their office safe and secure every day is rewarding in itself. There's a sense of accomplishment knowing that you're part of a bigger team. The security industry is very tight. At least in my experience, it's been very tight down there. I know basically everybody in most of those buildings. It's similar to policing in that blue brotherhood type of thing. Obviously not to the same level, but it really is a tight community, very small, and very, very easy to ruin your reputation if you're not careful, but also very easy to get a good reputation if people get to know who you are.
It is a very tight community. And on that note, what is it that you enjoy most about the community?
Commercial real estate, I really enjoy in the sense that they are always looking down the road, what's coming next. It's a business that has to change in the next few years, certainly on the mall side. I've done a lot of reading and research on sort of the mall of tomorrow. We know that malls are struggling today, and some of the things that they're doing to make sure that they become successful again going forward. So we're talking about, transition into event space, more of an experience-based mall, as opposed to going to do your shopping there. You're going there for an event, a concert, promotion of some sort. Stores sort of getting smaller and basically becoming a try it and go home, and then they'll send it to you via email. Like, it's really interesting to see how they're trying to work around. It's a space that you just go and buy stuff. Well, it's going to be a lot more than that going forward. And with that comes a lot of security issues, because now you're having more people there for different purposes. They're not just there to buy goods. They're there to maybe drink. They're there to maybe party. So those things bring different risks into the environment. So it is a constantly changing and dynamic industry, which I like. I like change. I like taking on new challenges. In terms of the security people who work in the commercial space, I find most of them really excited about what they do. They're loyal to what they do, and they really believe that they're making a difference. Sometimes they're not always rewarded, which is unfortunate. It's part of the sort of the job. But most of them, it's amazing to see that, they just constantly come to work. And a lot of these guys deal with negative people. Security takes care of problems, right? And so they're always dealing with those issues. And yet they come to work the next day and it's like, okay, let's reset. Let's go again. And let's go again. Constantly doing that is amazing to watch them be able to regenerate themselves.
Let's look ahead now to the next 5 years in your career. And you've recently gone through transition and you've moved to, we'll call it the consulting side, the dark side. And I know that you're still very much connected and integrated with the commercial real estate industry. What's the vision and what are some of the goals that you've set yourself as you move forward for the next chapter in your career?
Part of the reason for moving over to the dark side, as you put it, is that I hope to change it, to be honest. A lot of our vendors, being an end user, commercial real estate side, I saw some of the pitfalls and challenges that we had that we were looking for in our vendors and the inability to deliver those products. So now going over to the dark side, there's two things that it does for me. First of all, it gives me an opportunity to speak to that side of the business and hopefully change it, or at least position them better to manage the needs of the commercial property owners. But secondly, it also releases me from the commercial real estate sort of reins. I can speak freely in terms of what I think needs to be done. I can tell our clients, who are mostly still commercial properties, what I think and what I feel. Not that I wasn't saying that before, but it's different when you're an employee of an organization versus when you're a consultant. You've got a lot more freedom to say, this is the reality, and we need to deal with it.
And they also get to benefit from you having the end user experience as well.
Absolutely. It's the discussions we've had have really been eye-opening and a lot of fun, because the misperceptions on both sides. And now me sitting in the middle, I'm able to sort of see why those perceptions might exist, and we can sort of pursue solutions to them. So it really is, it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy it.
So this is going to make you a very good umpire or referee going forward.
I have 4 kids, so I do that on a day-to-day basis.
Are you ready to make the best next move in the Canadian real estate industry? We know moving to a new job is a career-defining decision, so our team will help you recognize and leverage the skills and passion that drive your performance. We want you to make the right choice and feel confident you are joining a team of people who perform. So contact us today or visit us at highviewpartners.ca/candidates.
Luciano, let's spend some time now getting to know you better. So why don't we start with some of the role models that you had growing up, and what did they teach you that you apply today?
Well, I would say my dad is definitely my biggest role model. He's a classic sort of immigrant story coming from Italy as a small child. He lost his dad when he was 9, so he was literally living on the streets trying to make money for his family. And listening to his stories of hardship and coming here with nothing and making a life of it and sending 3 sons to university and things like that. To me, that's a success story that I want to emulate. He was very proud. It was all about, your character defines you and a handshake is your word, that type of old school mentality, I guess, to some extent. And that's always been sort of my guiding beacon, I think, in life. In terms of everyday models, I've always been a naively justice-focused guy, if that makes sense. I'm a big fan of people like a Clint Eastwood in a Dirty Harry movie. Like, to me, justice is justice. And that's the way I see things, and that's the way I tend to talk. Sometimes gets me in trouble, but I just believe in values and integrity, and that you shouldn't be compromising those things for anybody.
I know you're a proud Torontonian, born and raised in Little Italy. Can you talk to us a bit about this wonderful city that I'm very passionate about as well? What is it about this city that stands out so much for you?
Toronto, obviously, a lot of great memories growing up downtown as a little kid, and then moving to the suburbs. It's changed immensely over that time period, and you see the waves of new immigrants coming into the city. Each wave adding color, adding perception, experiences, bringing with them all kinds of benefits that I don't think many cities can sort of rival in the world. I know when my cousins come here I've had cousins from France, Italy, and they're amazed at, walking into a store here and looking at all the different cultures, and you wouldn't see that in their countries. And here we are doing it in a peaceful fashion. That diversity is our biggest strength. I think there's a wealth of knowledge in the city because of that. And there's a lot of, I still view it as a very young city, certainly compared to other global cities. We're still very young, and still a lot of opportunity for us to take advantage of. My only challenge to that is sometimes I think we get obsessed with things that are just no-brainers to me. Other cities have already resolved those issues, and we're still dealing with them. Like transit, get it done and move on, right? Like, we need it. Let's get it done and move on. If you want to be a world-class city, you've got to act like a world-class city, and that means making some hard decisions and moving forward. And we're best placed for that. Like I say, there's nobody who has better diversity to deal with things and account for all the different aspects that people might want to consider.
Luciano, you've had a very successful career. I know you don't like to blow your own trumpet, so you can just nod in agreement.
Thank you
to that comment. But share with us, what do you credit your success to in your career?
I've always had a drive towards an objective, and it's figuring out what that objective is basically what it comes down to. Early on, I would listen to other people. I did banking, believe it or not, for a couple of years before I got into security, and I hated it because I listened to other people. So I made the conscious decision to go and follow your own passion. So it led me to policing. I could have stayed as a police officer for 30 years, retired, all those good benefits that people talk about. I've always looked for the next level. Where can I learn something new? What can I do to add to my character and to give back, type thing. So with that, my drive changes over the years. When I decided to leave policing, there were a lot of people looking at me, shaking their heads like, "What, are you crazy? Like, you're set there. You're not going to get fired." But I made a decision. I wanted to try something different. I thought private security was going to be exciting. And sure enough, it didn't let me down. It proved to be what I thought it would be, with its challenges, obviously. But that's part of the game, right? If it was all boring, then who would want to do it if everything just was given to you? So it's been a challenge, but it's been a great challenge. And now, as I start to get into my sort of mature years, that drive is changing again. Now I'm looking for new ways to give back to the industry. So we're talking about advising people. I'm getting into mentoring programs with ACES. I volunteered with their new mentoring program to give back to the up-and-coming security managers and security professionals, to give them some insight and some sort of lessons that I've learned that they can sort of take and do better with, take it to the next level.
I think the message here is, as you mentioned earlier in your career, listen to others, but also listen to yourself, and really, what is it that is driving you to step up your game and elevate yourself to that next level? Luciano, it's been a great conversation, listening to your journey, listening to what drives you and getting to know you better. I'd like to bring you now to the advice that you have for the listeners. And there are two audiences there. There is somebody looking to start out in this industry. There are others who are looking to raise their game and elevate their performance. What would be your message to both those audiences?
With those getting into the business, junior levels, if you will, I always tell them to understand, learn the business, because again, it goes back to that perception of security. They really understand a very small sliver of what the industry actually does. And so I encourage them to get involved with associations like ACES or CANAS. So there's a number of associations, but I usually refer them to ACES. And that's where they can at least start building blocks towards that career, understanding what sectors of security exist, different sort of niches that may be of interest to them, and to understand what those niches sort of require to get into them. So things like business continuity, emergency response planning, policy development, aviation security, you name it. There's all kinds of different slants that you can get into that will suit every different type of personality. And I encourage them to get involved with those associations, not just register and get the daily newsletter, but go to those association meetings. That's where I started. When I moved out of policing, I started going to the ACES meetings. I was part of their committee for a short time. You meet people in the industry, you understand what the challenges are. They give you some good advice. And so you start to understand what the business of security is at a rudimentary level, sort of, what are cameras, how do they work, and that kind of stuff. So that's where I would recommend somebody getting into the business starts. You need to understand those basics. Now, moving into the sort of more mature guys who've been in the business for a while, then I think they need to start to mature as a professional. And what I mean by that is, now that you understand security, how it operates, how to deploy guards, how to deploy CCTV, you need to transition from understanding the product to how the product can resolve the risks to the enterprise or the property. So what does that mean? Well, when I look at risks now, I couldn't tell you what a frame rate is, but I know what a CCTV camera can do for a property, how it protects the company, and how we can set up our policies and procedures to make sure that it's doing that effectively, respectful of privacy issues and things like that. So as you mature into the business, your level of understanding and expertise really starts to become more strategic, has to become more strategic. And you need to understand more than just security. You need to understand how security ties into the business and becomes a business enabler for the property management side. We don't want to be a barrier to success. We always get told, secure this product. Well, I can make any building, I can make any product impenetrable if you want it. No one will ever steal from you. No one will ever do anything wrong there, but you'll also be out of business within 30 days because no one's coming or going, right? So finding a balance between what you need to protect and how you can ensure that business continues in an efficient and effective manner is the key going forward.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.